Hello, welcome back to another episode of Awakening with Soulspirational. I'm Tish, and again with me in the studio is Steve Young and Rick Stutler. So today we're going to talk about a term, liminal, and I've got it written on the board behind us here. Liminal. I think a lot of us have heard of subliminal, and some of you watching and may be quite familiar with liminal, but we've been kind of going down a rabbit hole about liminal spaces, and so that's where our discussion is going to take us today, wherever that rabbit hole takes us as a group. And I just want to start off with some the definition first. So, for example, in architecture, the physical spaces, so liminal space, the physical spaces between one destination and the next. So, for example, hallways, airports, streets. Comes from the Latin word limen, Limen, meaning threshold. So, a liminal space is the time between what was and the next. A place of transition, a season of waiting, and not knowing. And so some of this information I got from liminalspaces.org, just to cite the source there. So you may already sense where we're going with this. So of what was and what is next, this space that's in between. So easy terms, if we're thinking about just with the examples, if I'm going on a trip and I'm in the process of going to the trip, I've already left my home, but I'm not quite at my destination, so the road's in between. Mm-hmm. If making things a little more personal, if we just left a relationship, whether it's personal or professional, and we don't know what the result of this is going to be, what is next, but we know that we've left this space, then we are in this liminal space. So,
yes, and kind of expanding on that particular piece, it's that when it comes to spirituality, it's that space of where you are in your life and where you want to be in your life on any given topic, whether it's a material manifestation or a spiritual manifestation, and living within that space and how that feels living within that space, and the knowns and the unknowns.
And I think sometimes, that known is what may keep us here, instead of taking a step into the liminal space.
Mm-hmm. So where does the essence of time figure in all this? Because, a liminal space, you might be going through something and you don't know where you're going to wind up, and that's what liminal space is. But here in the 3D, where we're at now, everything is based on time.
But it could be days, it could be years. Right?
That's what I mean. That's what I'm saying.
It could be decades that you're in liminal space.
Yeah.
And that's where I think, even though we may not be consciously stating, I don't want to go to the liminal space, Steve. It may keep me in my comfort zone of being where I am, because I don't want to be in that unknowingness of the liminal.
I think that comes into play more often when the universe boots us from where we are into something that we weren't prepared to go into, versus something like, I don't like my job. I go looking for a new job. I find a new job that I like much more. I sign that job offer. Now I've figured out my next destination that I want to go to. And then I give my 2-week notice to my current job. I now enter that liminal space towards something I know I want to go to and I'm excited about.
And it's a more limited time in that particular analogy.
You know the defined time there, so there's not anxiety of how long is this going to take.
That's the word I was just going to pop up. The anxiety.
The anxiety.
Yeah.
Whereas if it's something that you weren't necessarily prepared for, the loss of a loved one or a relationship. I kind of feel the
Tower card energy kind of coming in.
And you get caught up in that ego state of wanting to stick within that comfort zone in a moment like that of, this is safe, at least I feel okay where I'm at. And not wanting to be forced into something that I don't have control over or don't feel ready for.
Do you think there's a possible fear of realizing that you're in a liminal space? I'm just throwing that out there because it's something that most people, I've never even thought about it until today. I mean, it goes on all the time, but I've never really thought about it.
Yeah, whether it's unconscious or we're just looking at it in a different, we just call it we're waiting. Like, you know, we don't know what's coming up. I'm in the process of manifesting, whatever that is, something physical, spiritual, or otherwise. But I think it's wonderful to have a term associated with that space in between the what was and what is, or to be.
Yeah, I think you can look at, if you are somebody who values stability and security in life, that anytime you're in a liminal space, it's threatening stability and security because you don't have those things set and defined.
Now, what about the word limbo? Does that fit in here?
I think limbo fits in very well in liminal spaces because while you might know the destination that you're going to, it's also not set in stone that you're going to make it there. You might be detoured to something else. So you are in a state of limbo. It's kind of like a matter of how you handle being in the limbo.
Yeah.
And with it meaning threshold, stepping over, but subliminal meaning, let me see how that was worded. Because I thought that was kind of interesting too. So subliminal is below that threshold at which an effect is produced. And I think I read somewhere. So subliminal, below the threshold of conscious perception, below the threshold of conscious perception, especially if still able to produce a response. So below the threshold of conscious perception, especially if still able to produce a response. And then liminal, of or pertaining to a threshold or entrance, of or pertaining to a beginning or first stage of a process, inceptive, marginal.
So do you think that in the subliminal area, you're relying on the default programming that's inside of you that may not be necessarily helping you out?
Sounds good to me, Steve.
Me too. I'll vote for that.
You know, like, if you have default programming in on how you handle specific situations, you know, the fight, flight, or fawn responses, and you get pushed into the loss of a relationship, and your default response in a situation like that might be flight. Like, you don't know how to handle it, so you're just going to take off. Because that's what your default programming is, and you haven't been aware enough to take a look at that programming within yourself. It would get really easy to get lost in that subliminal response within that liminal space, rather than being open to, this is where I am now, how do I go to where I want to from here, consciously.
And for me, I think that's the key word, is the conscious awareness that one is in that liminal space. So if the subconscious, you know, is telling us to flee or to fight or whatever it may be for the individual, when we become consciously aware that we are in this space, then we can pull up from that which is below the threshold back up the conscious awareness to say, you know what, this time in this relationship, I'm going to respond or react differently because now we're consciously aware, because I think so often we are just working off ego or those whatever conditioning.
Yeah, and if we're having a response such as anxiety, being in that liminal space, whether it's from a subliminal response or not, anxiety being fear of the future, we're not being present. So we're not in the moment of where we are now. We're too focused on what's going to happen in the future, or we're too focused on what just happened to us in the past causing the anxiety or the depression, not being present on where we are, and that adds into the madness of that liminal space of being caught up in this whirlwind of just not knowing what to do.
So let's talk about some of the things that we can do. Being mindful is to being present, being in the moment where you are now. Paying attention to, we've talked before about angel numbers or different clues from the universe. Trusting, for me, this is a big one when I'm in that liminal space of, I don't know what's up ahead. Actually, years ago when I started my journey, I was afraid of what was up ahead around the corner because I was in a place where I was expecting it would be something really bad, right? Because it was the mindset of my upbringing to that point of my mid to late 20s. And then I came to the realization or the acceptance that I don't have to know what's up ahead around the bend. I trusted the situation that it was either going to be something beautiful or it was going to be a learning lesson, which is still beautiful in its own way. And it allowed me to reduce the anxiety about whatever the future was while I was navigating that liminal space, even though I definitely would not have put it in these, used the term liminal back at that time. But being in that in-between of not knowing where I was headed. Everything was in disarray. And
I think that's a good point that you
moment.
just brought up, is not knowing. In particular instances, we do know the destination, and in other instances, we don't know the destination of what's next or where we're going. The times where we don't know what's next or where we're going is more often than not when ego kicks in and those subliminal responses kick in, the not being present, not being conscious, and making decisions consciously. Those are the times where faith really has its place, where faith really has its place in a person and in a soul's path in life of just letting go and saying, I'm going to have faith that no matter what happens next, I'm going to be okay.
Yeah, it's kind of like life itself. It's like a leap of faith, you know?
Mm-hmm. And I feel faith and trust.
Mm-hmm.
Trusting in yourself that you are going to make the best choices that you can possibly make within that space. Trusting yourself and having faith in yourself in the process and God, however one may feel with that. But yeah.
And even as twisted as it might sound, you may have just gone through something as a test to show you that you can trust in yourself. Saying, I'm going to put you through a situation via the universe to make you prove to yourself that you can trust yourself, because you will be left with yourself in this situation. Maybe you'll be with nobody around you physically, and it's all about you in that moment. Can you put that self-love back at yourself and the trust back at yourself and say, I'm here for you, I have you, I'm walking with you through this?
And it's not to say that everything that happens, because I can already hear some of the pushback on that, it's not to say that everything that happens to us, like that we're causing it, it's our fault. But the universe does happen. It's still true that it may not be, some people can equate it to every little thing. But I think there are some things, we'll just leave it there. There are some things that the universe definitely brings to us, so we can extract whatever it is that we need from that particular situation, the learning lesson. It's just I can see where some people have an issue with the blanket coverage of that. So I just wanted to caveat that because, yeah.
Yes, not all lessons are going to be the same. They may be revisited to see what you've learned, and from the new viewpoint of growth from the last time you experienced it. But it's not always going to be about the same thing. So again, that ties back into being present in any given moment when you're in the liminal space and saying, this is what's happened, this is where I'm at now, where do I want to go from here?
And what a beautiful time. Like, I'm almost even seeing it like the blank canvas, right? So when you find yourself in the liminal space of, okay, what would I like to see? So maybe I just got divorced. So then, which I didn't, but we'll use that as an analogy. So what are my goals? Like, being able to take the time for me. Do I even want to be in another relationship? Do I want to be single for a while? What does that look like? So within that space, and I would argue that probably a lot of our time in life is spent in liminal spaces. I won't go down that rabbit hole, but we can spend the time for oneself, right? Creating that list of goal set, of being present, being mindful, going into meditation. How can I get my footing? Because maybe it is that I want a relationship that is going to be healthy and loving and supportive, or whatever these things are. But maybe I'm actually not, like, I wouldn't be a good counterpart for that yet. So maybe I need to do my own healing. And I can take the liminal space for me to get healthy and to get my footing, so that when I meet that healthy partner, that we're much more of a fit. Because maybe, and I know right after my first divorce, that just was not a healthy space for me personally. And that getting right into a relationship at that point, it would have been with, if a healthy person came in, I don't know that I even would have accepted that healthy person. It definitely wouldn't have lasted, because I wasn't in a place for that. So we can use that liminal space to create, to take care of oneself, to get our footing, to get healthy, or whatever that is, so we can be better aligned for that which we're manifesting.
And I think you touched on an important point of living often within liminal spaces throughout our lives. If we come to the place where we have an acceptance that we are constantly evolving and constantly growing, then you would know that things aren't going to stay the same for long throughout your life. There is going to be transitions that happen constantly. People will come and go. Places will be seen and will be left. Things will be bought and sold. And that's where acceptance and letting go and letting things flow come into play. So liminal space has much more of a prominent role in our lives than we really think. It's really easy to attach yourself to a specific goal or a specific car or house or material, but we all know that once we get that thing,
We want the next shinier thing.
It's okay, what now? What other goal do I want to set in life? So it's even debatable for how long we stay at that destination, no matter what it is, before we start thinking about, where do I go from here? So there are times where a liminal space feels really good, like it's a goal that took us a long time to achieve. And then when we get it, we bask in it, and some of us cling to it because we're like, it took me forever to get this and I'm never letting go.
Right.
And other times it's, this was cool, but I want something else now. And it's being able to keep going without feeling the threat of loss in those situations. I've experienced many times in my life where, because I didn't have certain things in my life, that when I did have those things, I would cling to them. And oftentimes I would cling to them past the expiration point, where the universe is like, it's time to let go, time to move on. It's like, no, this was good, and who knows if I'll ever have this again, this feeling, this connection, this whatever it is. But as you may know, if you've experienced, you let go of the past to let in the present. And then when the present comes, you find yourself eventually living in that present, having gratitude for what you have in the present. And if you're really living in the present and you have gratitude for what you have in the present, your focus isn't on the future or the past. So you're living in that moment. But also you're not fully attached to it, because whatever is in the present that is meant to move on, you're able to be okay with that.
And boy, all that energy expended to that point of attaining whatever that thing,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, I don't know. I feel like this culmination or this excitement or whatever it is, just going through the liminal space of getting to that point of achieving, and then how beautiful to be able to say, oh, you know what I mean? And I mean, it may not be a toss away, but not having that attachment to it.
Yeah, you could look at it as just a previous chapter in your book.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of your story. It doesn't have to be something that you threw in the trash, right?
Yeah.
Maybe down the road you can look back at all the things you've lived through in these chapters and say, that was awesome, that was awesome, that was cool. I had rough times there, but I learned, it's part of the story.
You know, that saying, I forget how it is, like you've got on a tombstone, right? The year of birth, the year of death, and then we live life in the dash, right? And just how much of that dash is actually that liminal space. So, yeah, I don't know, just really interesting. So Steve just brought us down this rabbit hole the other day, and we thought it would be a good video to just kind of talk about, to bring conscious awareness to this word, liminal. Yeah. And
exactly.
How do you feel about it?
Until the other day, I never even knew what liminal was. And then, I'm sitting there thinking, wow, this is like way over my head. And I thought, no, it isn't. And Steve and I talked about it earlier today, and it made more sense. And it's like, that's why I said it a while ago. I mean, we're all living in liminal spaces right now. We may not be aware of it. But then when we are aware of it, I don't really know what you can really do to advance it, or you just go for the ride,
I think that's put a wall of going with the ride, because in some ways I see all of life as a liminal space.
Yeah.
Because at any point, and any of us who've gone through tragedies, we've lost a loved one, we've lost our home, we've lost the car, we lost the job. So it may look like, oh, I'm pretty secure, I'm right where I want to be in my space.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no liminal going on here, because I'm like, everything is set. But is it really, like, ultimately, right? But there's that comfort of feeling in those moments of that everything is kind of set for the moment. But
the real question would be, in my mind, is how do you recognize you're even in a liminal space?
So for me, I think one knows, like, in a grander scheme, we can look at bigger things as a touchstone, right? So if somebody has ever been part of a relationship and then they broke up, which most of us can say that we've been in a situation, maybe a friendship even. Maybe we've been friends with somebody for, 20 years, and then something just happened. And then now we're no longer friends, but, like, I've had this friendship for 20 years. I don't even know how to navigate certain things, because I always went shopping with this person, I always did whatever. So I think one can think about their past experiences to get an idea of what that means for them, because I'm no longer in, like, in this friendship that I've been part of. All of a sudden that's gone, but I don't know what the result of that's going to be. Like, I don't know where this is taking me.
Yeah.
Now that we're no longer friends. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm just thinking out loud in a kind of a way.
No, that's really good. I mean, can you think of a time where even, starting your own business, right?
And Steve and I were talking about that earlier too. It's just like, I'm open, I'm ready to go, but I don't know when it's going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen. I just got to try to make it happen. And what we just said a minute ago, you got to go for the ride and see what happens.
But in one way, like, you went from no longer just having what you normally do for work, you opened up the door, created this liminal space that I want to do this. You're doing this, you have the physical space, and yet you're still in the liminal space because you still haven't, it
Yeah.
just kind of feels like
So you can almost,
intersections.
Yeah.
I would argue that you could tie being in a liminal space to having a desire, period. Because anytime we have a desire, it's usually about something that we don't currently have in our life,
That's true.
which means we now have a new destination.
Mm-hmm.
And we will never stop having desires as long as we are human beings.
This is true.
So even in my mind, even the moment you think of a new desire, you're now entering liminal space, because you're no longer, in a sense, happy about where you are in that moment, because you don't have that new desire that you launched.
That's a very good way of putting it.
It's a finicky way of looking at happiness there, because I don't want to say you're not happy the moment you've launched a new desire, but you realize that there's somewhere else you want to go, somewhere else, something else you want to achieve or attain.
Do you think that it's part of moving on to something else too? Is like it all meshes somehow?
It's like part of your evolution.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, because hopefully one is moving forward, right?
Yeah.
With their desires.
And this is why I have like a little bit of a sticking point inside of me when it comes to the idea of stagnancy, because there's times where you feel like you're stagnant and that you're not doing anything, but energy's always moving, always moving. Mm-hmm. And we know that if we sit long enough and pout and sit on our butt and say, I'm not going anywhere, we get forced to do it somehow, some way.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a little bit of resistance against the idea of stagnancy and not moving forward and not experiencing growth, because I feel like it will happen anyway, whether you want it to or not. It's just a matter of
On your terms or the universe's
how
terms?
willing are you to go along with it.
A lot of times it's the universe's terms.
Especially when we're doing a lot of this.
Yeah.
All right, so we're just about at that time. So for me, the last minute would be a recap of when you find yourself in a liminal space. Take advantage of it, whether that is taking the time to cry, taking the time to heal, taking the time to laugh. Be present, be in the moment, maybe find the gratitude in the moment. You'd appreciate right now it's October 30th. So the beautiful colors of the trees, the crisp fall air, whatever that happens to be for you.
I would say that anybody that finds themselves in a transition or a transformation, and they're going through a liminal space, to connect with themselves and their inner being and find out what it is that they really want. Because it's so easy to let other people's opinions shine over yours in situations where you're feeling in the unknown. Tap into what you feel inside of which way you want to go, and trust in that.
May even change the trajectory of your liminal space.
Yeah.
I know people that are going through relationship problems and people that are going through job scares and all sorts of things right now. Just dig inside and see what it is inside that you really feel that you want.
I'm just grateful that we were able to bring this to light, because once again, I didn't know what liminal space was. Now I do know what it is, and now so do you. So there you go.
So we can take advantage of the information. We are going to close for now. So thank you so much for watching. Until next time, thank you. Be well and namaste.
Thank you.
Stay.